And now we welcome on our first special guest to the podcast, Smitty Barstool. He apparently hosted a fantasy football podcast many years ago. That is the genesis of the invite on this show. There was some beef on Twitter yesterday, and we're here to clear the air. Welcome.
General Smitty, that's another one. People call him the General.
General's getting up there a little bit.
People who
Blockhead.
That's an ugly one. That's
one.
an ugly one. Are there any others? What about in the Twitch streaming world? What are the young kids that are fans you call you? Are they General Smitty people?
No, they're General. They respect the rank.
Hell yeah. And people can catch you on Twitch pretty much all the time on Barstool Game Time.
Yeah, we're pretty much live at any given point of the day now at night.
Beautiful, but that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about fantasy with, I guess, the fantasy forefather at Barstool Sports. Tell us a little bit.
We got a little air clearing to do here. So Smitty's the invite on the show.
Well,
came
Dave
from,
Portnoy isn't here, so the air isn't ever going to get cleared. But
we can clear that. We can clear what air we can clear.
That's fair.
And maybe let's just the history of your fantasy. Can we call it the struggles of creating fantasy content at Barstool?
Somewhat.
Let me set the scene for those that don't know. Yesterday on Twitter, for whatever reason, and this is also something that I think has something to do with it, where the person who quotes Barstool Radio will he knows where buttons can get pushed, and he'll take things out of context. Because I think Dave was talking about his rivalry week bet with PMT. Somehow the fantasy show got into it, and I'll just read the quote. It said, put this fantasy football podcast together. He worked at it and got it in, which I don't really know what that means. He did this job better than Smitty Barstool did, which I also don't know what that means. Smitty's the all-time when things don't work, point the finger at the other guy. There is no agenda there. To which Smitty responded, I had a FF pod for 3 years. I wasn't backed by Barstool. Was told not to do one anymore because someone wanted to do it. That someone got fired. That someone's Michael Rapaport. Can we talk about him now, by the way? Is that
I think it's pretty open. The deposition that we had 2 weeks ago, everything was kind of laid out on the table. And I didn't know that we could talk about it, but since Dave and Erica did, fuck it.
Yeah. So that's someone Michael Rapaport got fired. I asked to bring it back, told I couldn't. New pod starts. Wasn't invited to be a part of the new incarnation. No finger pointing reality. All of that is fair, I think. And that's the part where some people might have seen like it was a rivalry between us. It wasn't like a personal thing that you were necessarily invited to be a part of the new incarnation. That was just like me and Rowan were kind of talked about it together. Me and you don't have as close a relationship. And like it wasn't anything personal there. But then after that, I asked you, I said, care to come on the pod to discuss, and now we're here. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
What do you want to clear the air with what Dave was saying, what you were saying? I think all what you said is true. Like the whole Rapaport backstory, I think like there's some interesting aspects to that people, the public, might not really know.
Yeah, we could take it from the jump and then get into things where I got confused with.
Perfect.
So in 2013, Jonathan Bales, who's a member of the Action Network, he's made millions of dollars playing fantasy football. He's one of the best fantasy football and fantasy minds in the world. Maybe one of the best minds of the world. The guy's a savant. He created a fantasy lab, sold that for millions. He's just he's next level when it comes to that sort of stuff. Very bright guy, way brighter than me. So we met on a degenerate blog that we both were writing for in like 2009, 2010 called Athlete Status that we both found on Craigslist. Kind of like a Barstool type blog. We're both from around Philly. And we worked on that together for someone else. Actually got stiff for payments. Bales went full hardo on him, ended up getting our money back. We remained close.
He got your money back too?
Yeah.
Physically?
It almost got to that point.
Does Bales have mob ties? Like what?
He might. I don't want to throw him, get him in any trouble, but no, Bales.
So he definitely does.
Bales is a bulldog,
right?
And he hates getting disrespected, in especially that matter, and also especially in 2009, 2010. I was struggling. We were both basically side hustling for everything we got. Bales was writing for many blogs. I was writing for many blogs and just trying to get by, selling pasta, doing baseball lessons. And come 2013, 2014, we're both starting to have similar success in our fields. Bales with fantasy, myself with Barstool.
You're full-time at this point. You got taken on full-time right around then, right?
2013, yeah. And Bales, who lived in Philly, we always talked about fantasy, and decided to start up a fantasy football preview. Just a one-time deal, I think in 2013. And that got enough response that we're just like, okay, we'll do a weekly fantasy football show, more focusing on daily fantasy, and just put it out there.
for context for the newer people that are listening, at this time, I was also working at Barstool this time. This is in the era where podcasts didn't exist.
Oh, yeah.
Like, now there's a podcast. Everyone's got a podcast. There's podcasts for everything. It's a big part of our business. This was the time where, in Dave Portnoy's brain, which is the brain of Barstool, podcast didn't exist. If you had a podcast, he didn't care. If you said, hey, Dave, want to come on my podcast? He'd be like, fuck you. I don't care about podcasts.
Especially to Smitty.
So, no, so that's what I'm saying. It's like, it wasn't.
For anybody, that would be the response. The fact that it was Smitty made it. I mean, there's obviously like he brought up your name out of nowhere with this most recent tweet. So there's obviously a deep history there.
Well, at that time, I didn't even refer to it as a podcast. We called it the Barstool Fantasy Hour. Put it up as a blog. I bought like $200 of unlimited SoundCloud for the year. Put it up there.
Hell yeah.
Found out like 2 years later, it went to an iTunes channel. Hey, I had an iTunes channel. Fuck it. And that went with a weekly show I did with a former member of the Bachelorette, Craig Robinson, and Barstool Franco, who ended up in an insane asylum. Just like a weekly show from like 2013.
I shared a hotel room with that guy one time. It was quite an experience.
So it made sense that he wound up in an insane asylum.
No, he's a nice guy.
Nicest guy in the world. He's just like, screw, we're 20 loose. And he's doing all right now, so it's fine.
Happens.
But basically, during the time when I was put on record as the laziest sack of shit on earth, I was trying to do this with Bales. I was doing a weekly quote-unquote podcast. I think it was called like the Barstool Philly Sports and Life podcast. I think the only other audio things at the time that were going on was KFC Radio.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there really wasn't much
Right.
out there. So, I mean, we just put it out weekly and didn't really think about it. That went on and kind of grew fantasy between me and Bales each football season. So next year did the same thing, got some more legs. Next year did the same thing. And then in 2016, decided to bring it back. Now, this is our first year in New York. This is when podcasts are established.
Mm-hmm.
This is when Part of My Take starting to really take off. KFC Radio taking off.
It's like the gold rush for podcasts.
Pretty much. Bales and I have no other right to assume that we're just doing our thing, and we start our fantasy football preview show, let that go. And I think we started recording week one when Dave asked about it. And I was like, yeah, we've just been doing this, and should we keep doing it? He's like, hold off on it for now. Michael Rapaport wants to do a fantasy football podcast. Now, at the time, Rapaport was big fish. He was our biggest get at the time by far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the
Shots
first.
fired, cat temp, but like he
yeah.
was
No.
by far.
Or Pat McAfee, you know what I mean? This
No,
is
but
No,
he
this
was
is before
McAfee,
McAfee.
yeah.
This is before
McAfee?
This is
Well
our
before
biggest
McAfee, yeah.
star that we rolled out the red carpet for at the time.
nice.
Bales of Mine podcast, it had a cult following. It was never really pushed by Barstool other than me putting it up on the blog. No offense to you, Hank, or Part of My Take, but this is also prime. Nobody gives a fuck about your fantasy podcast sort of deal. So I'm getting heat from outside and internal, but the people who actually listened to it, it got decent numbers. And decent, I mean like 2,000 to 5,000 people a week listened. And people enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to every week. And Bales, like, I was an okay host. Bales,
They're probably getting a lot of information from Bales more than anything.
Exactly.
People are winning money off of this.
Exactly. And we had a great report. It was just an entertaining show overall. I think like Lenny, Chaps, like people hopped on. It was a good thing.
Did in the closet, the confessional, the old confessional room.
Exactly.
I remember that.
Exactly. So Dave said, hold off. I think Rapaport wants to start something. And at the time, I'm like, okay, you win some, you lose some. Looking back on it, that was a big time shit move. And it sucks because
Shit move on who's like it was felt shitty to you, or like he shit on you?
now hindsight's 2020, but Rapaport could have bridged the gap and said, okay, you guys have something going on. Why don't we try to mend together and create something? Instead, he came on and said, no, I want to do my thing. Get rid of him. Okay. And Erica and Dave basically told me to stop doing it. I got no backing whatsoever. Again, looking back on it at the time, okay, whatever. But now it's like, okay, that sucks.
It's actually, looking back on it, it was dumb to have like Bales, someone that's like one of the most successful fantasy people, out on a podcast, and then Rapport, who obviously turned out to be a disaster. Like, looking back on it, that was the mistake. But yeah, hindsight's 2020.
Just no backing whatsoever. Right. It was just like, oh, Smitty can deal with losing this thing that he's done for 3 years. Fuck him. So throughout that year, obviously, the Michael Rapaport Fantasy Football League becomes quite contentious. Huge
So
piece
you
of
were
content.
in the league though, right?
Oh yeah, I was in the league.
And this is almost you and his beef in the league is almost the genesis of all the rifts with Michael Rapaport at Barstool.
Well, that's how it started.
That's how everything started.
Michael Rapaport would come in and act like he was he was the end-all, be-all celebrity, the biggest thing
King
ever.
Dick.
He would only talk to Big Cat and PFT. And
I met him like
Dave.
20 times. He always asked like what my name was and act like I never met him, which
And-
is pretentious.
Yeah, and he started the Fantasy Football League, which he's done for the Stern Show, and doesn't know anything about fantasy football. His co-host, however, does for Fantasy Football Follies, wherever the fuck that joke show was. And I remember, I think it was week 2 or week 3, Michael Rapaport was doing the rundown, and he's calling everybody out for not caring about his Fantasy Football League, which the winner got nothing. It wasn't incentivized whatsoever. Nobody talked about it because Rapaport didn't talk to us. We're kind of like, fuck it. And basically called everyone pussies on the rundown, and that's when I stood up and walked over to the rundown and started yelling at him. Like, you're a fucking loser, pal. Nobody gives a shit about you. You got fucking dumped by Phoebe. You're the fucking loser. I'm going to win your Fantasy Football League. And that's how that started. So it was more of an act than anything because I felt like somebody needed to step
chance
up.
to rile it up.
Fantasy football, you talk shit. That's what you do.
Somebody needed to step up
Right.
and accost this fraud. Did I use that correctly?
No, that was beautiful.
Love
That was beautiful, and that's what you did. You lit him the fuck up, and at the time, it seemed like Rapaport had a lot of. It was almost like that was a against the grain move to light up Rapaport at that time because he was a new hire. Everybody's kind of on his dick at that time. Like right now, like the tide has obviously turned on Michael Rapaport, especially in here. But that was probably one of the first times where there was contention between people and Michael Rapaport. So you're in his league, and you said you're going to win this league and win the money. Did you wind up winning the league?
I ended up winning the league, and beyond that, we had a lot of daily fantasy bets every week in which we were going to DraftKings, and it's actually cited in the deposition, the court case.
Shut up.
In which,
FanDuel.
Yes, FanDuel, DraftKings. We played a lot of daily fantasy, but there would be times like a Rapaport would say, okay, I'm in this $1,000, heads up, join, and I'll join, and I end up joining, and he didn't join. So I ended up playing some random shark for $1,000 because I play daily fantasy every week, and I've had ups and downs. 3 years ago, I did very well. 2 years ago, I did very bad. Last year, I broke even. This year, I'm back doing okay. So Rapaport and I would go back and forth through daily fantasy, and just the entire relationship with him and Barstool seemed to revolve around this fantasy fucking football league, and it climaxed with Rough and Rowdy and him getting fired. So it was well known that
You did win the league, though, right?
yes, I did win the league.
And what do you mean Rough and Rowdy? A climax with Rough and Rowdy how?
Well, it climaxed because he and I went at it over fantasy football, and then it became
You guys made
personal.
a side bet or some shit, right? Like he owed you money and he was not paying up,
Correct.
if I remember correctly.
Correct. That's the basis of it. It will be proven in the courts, legitimately.
Which is preposterous because that's usually like something you would say
Oh.
like as like a joke, but like this is actually in court right
Yes,
now. And
there are receipts and a paper trail.
Record
and
will
all of
show,
that,
yeah.
Yes. And it culminated with Rough and Rowdy because it got really personal at that point, and then we also what happened with Rapaport exploded there. But it was well known
But
that
I still don't understand the Rough and Rowdy part. How did it? But you didn't fight him at Rough and Rowdy.
no, I didn't fight him at Rough and Rowdy, but there were accusations being thrown from me, calling him a fraud that he didn't pay up, and he said, okay, I'll bet you that you get your face kicked in.
Oh.
And then there was also like a bet on radio where he said that he would bring money to the office right now, like 1,000 or 2,000, wherever it was, to the office by noon today, and I better show up. He didn't show up, and then he called in on radio again. He's like, fuck that, $10,000 right now. And it's like, well, you didn't show up with the money when you said you would. You're a fraud.
And instead of paying up, his only response, which is like the genesis of the whole thing, instead of just manning up, paying up, being a man of his word, his response to go at Smitty was like, ask Smitty if he's on the juice right now, loves talking to his fans, right? That's basically like he didn't want to accept defeat, so he was just trying to go back
said
at
that
Smitty
over
with
and
something.
over
Well,
again.
a bet actually wasn't made because I wouldn't make it with him because he's a fraud. I can't trust collecting money with him at that time. He even like said he'll PayPal Diggs from Indy and tried to PayPal him, and Diggs is like, "What the fuck are you talking about, man? I never got a PayPal." But that's neither here nor there. But when it revolves around fantasy football and Rapaport, it was well known at the time, as is known now, that Rapaport took a fantasy football podcast not away from me, but took it over.
You were in the market.
I was very angry about that, and afterwards, there's numerous times on record where I asked Dave if I can bring some sort of fantasy football podcast or content back, and he has said no. Privately, he has said that I wasn't allowed, or anybody was allowed, to do anything with the Action Network guys anymore. And then last off season, going into 2018, I asked him again if I can start up something with fantasy football, and he said unless it's sponsored, no. Which is catch-22, because how can I try to do something unless it's sponsored when I can't show something? It's just a whole mess. And then this season, the first I knew about this fantasy football podcast was a week before the season, when Hank came up to me and said that, we're starting up a fantasy football podcast again. We want to do stuff with Twitch and Twitch Room, like want to know how that works and stuff. And I actually thought you were inviting me to the fantasy football podcast. That wasn't the case. And I'm like, oh, you just want to use Twitch. Okay. And I even said to you, like, oh, well, before I knew that was the case, I was like, yeah, I'd be like more than interested to do something. I fucking would love to shove it in Rapaport's face, say that I'm involved with the fantasy football podcast again. And it was just for the Twitch Room, which
Twitch stream. I was saying
Twitch
the Twitch stream show. I was inviting you on that.
Yeah.
I'll tell the background of that is that I obviously didn't know any of this, like the conversations you were having with Dave last fall when we were doing PMT. Even though obviously they shit on fantasy football and no one cares about your fantasy team, I just in the podcast charts, in seeing other sports media companies, everyone has a fantasy football podcast. It's clearly there's a market there, and clearly we have a big football audience. So in my head last year, I was like, it's kind of dumb that there's not a fantasy football podcast here.
I agree.
And then in August, I brought that up. It was me and Ron were actually brainstorming outside, if you will, and we were talking about we could do a fantasy football podcast. And I just brought it up to Dave, and that's how it happened. It wasn't I'm not saying this offensively. It just wasn't I didn't really think about you in that way at all. But it wasn't
I didn't think you were trying to be malicious with it, but again, not thinking about me after I did it for 3 years, and then all of the content developed specifically around fantasy football last year. I'd be lying if I say I didn't feel slighted by it. I mean, in my mind, and I tried not to think about it when it happened, put it in the back of my mind, because the more I thought about it, the more people basically chirped me about it. The more I started thinking about it, the more I got upset. The only reasons I wouldn't be involved in something like this after doing it for 3 years and all the content that was sprouted through Rapaport would be either basically I'm not cool enough, I'm not qualified enough, or I'd be a detriment to the production. Because if I'm not doing something like this after I've done it already, then what good am I here for? It's like Dave before the Super Bowl when he was chirping me that I wouldn't be coming to Minneapolis for the Eagles to represent us. I'm just well, then fire me. What the fuck good am I here for? I just don't understand it from those points.
That's all fair. From the obviously in just general with shows, 4 people on me and Ron kind of talk no joke. We were just talking about it smoking. We were just
I just want to give my perspective on the whole, or just how I came to be part of it, because I just want to make sure that that's fully represented. It did just come up Hank brought it up smoking, being yo, low key, I kind of want to do is some kind of fantasy podcast. It's stupid we don't have one, just like he's saying. And I was that fucking makes a lot of logical sense. And I also didn't know the backstory of how many attempts you made to talk to Dave. But from my point of view, I was man, I've done 2 podcasts here. Both of them have fizzled out and haven't really done well in the charts. fantasy seems like something that would really crush on the charts. And like you and I were trying and still trying, Smitty. You and I were trying to do this like Philly podcast to try and get this thing off the ground. And so it's like I was trying to like spread a net as wide as possible and just like, okay, this is something that might work. This is something that might work. And it didn't register to me that it was like stepping on your toes until right when Hank was asking, when it's like, oh shit, like this is kind of like Smitty's shit. And like, so I guess like that should have been a bigger consideration.
I wouldn't say
it.
You're stepping on my toes. Anybody here is welcome to do anything. If somebody wants to start a gaming medium or whatever, they're more than welcome to. I'd question like, okay, why? But anybody is more than welcome to do anything. But that's same sort of along the lines is like, it's troubling to me around here why I wouldn't have been included in something like this from the jump after I did it for so long and after it was basically taken away from me and then content thereeafter happened.
Right. That's why I asked about the twitching. But like the show, it's like having 4 hosts on a show is like a lot. In any show, that's just like any show I listen to. It's not, you don't really see 4 hosts because it's a lot. Big Tennessee was brought in because we wanted to have like a neutral commissioner for the league. That wasn't obviously like you've been here a long time. If you were, it just would have been different if I was the commissioner, if Rowan was the commissioner. It would have like created a different dynamic within the league. We wanted kind of that dynamic with the intern commissioner. So it's 3 people. That's why I was like, oh, that's kind of the podcast. We'll do the Twitch show on Tuesdays. That's already your thing anyway. Like that can be the whole, like we want this whole fantasy experience to be like a podcast, social media, Twitch, like everything. So I wasn't really like, that's why like I thought I was trying to include you. You're in the league and stuff. It wasn't like as far as the podcast.
The league is a whole different story. I mean, that's just a mockery of everything when it comes to when it comes to like what you guys are trying to do here. That league is a supplement of it. The league is to create content for the actual fantasy football podcast. I was running an actual fantasy football podcast. I gave information. That was trying to give
some information
stuff out there. I'm not saying you don't, but saying like, oh, you've been invited to the league with like balls and fucking mush and everything.
And the Twitch show was something that we were trying to like that when I came to you, like that was there, that hadn't been developed at all. We were trying to figure out what that was going to be. So that was like, I thought we were going to be doing that together.
When you approached me about the Twitch show, you said, yeah, you and Rowan had the podcast and you wanted to get Clem in on the Twitch show, and you were asking me how the best way to do that was.
No, but then when we started, like you've been in the room of like we're gonna start, and then I was like, "Where's Smitty?" It's like he kind of went away.
There's a lot of cooks in there in that kitchen. I want to be able to have my face on something too. I want to spread my name across a whole bunch of nets because I don't know if you guys have noticed, everything that I've done here, other than game time, I have lost or been kicked out of. So this was one thing that I thought you said before that. You just assumed that I didn't want to do anything anymore. I didn't give myself the benefit of the doubt by thinking that I assumed that if anybody were to start something, they would at least talk to me first about it. But
right,
there's absolutely nothing that can be done about it now. So
the whole year had passed, and like obviously, again, I didn't know the background conversations you had with Dave, but the whole year had passed, and it had seemed like basically 2 years had passed without any fantasy show. So I was like, no one's doing it. Like I just wasn't like I wasn't like, oh, like Smitty's getting fucked, let me jump in here. It was like no one's doing a fantasy podcast. We might as well do one. I just assumed like that you just weren't. You know what I mean? I didn't realize the conversations that you'd be getting shut down.
This is like I like both of you guys personally. This isn't. I don't really take it as like a knock on a personal. Well, I kind of do, but. I definitely do on a professional standpoint, but personally, it's just like whatever. More of my anger and frustration is thrown towards Dave in situations like this because I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't, and like just the support you guys have had from the beginning of having basically all these resources and getting the podcasts, boom, cleared right away. I mean. Roan, first time, long time, we went to Dave, and he's just like, oh, well, I don't think that's going to work. Keep trying at it when we have, like, a Mets podcast, 20 Chicago podcasts.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, we've tried that, and so it's like, from my standpoint, it's like, fuck, like, well, I know Hank has, like, the 2 podcasts Hank is associated with are fucking at the top of the charts every time. So it's like, all right, Hank has proven to be able to create good podcasts.
I would
like,
hitch my dick to that wagon too.
That's that's my thinking. Just like well, and at the same time, we are still trying to get like Philly stuff off the ground. You know what I mean? Like we are still like there's like constant like emails going back and forth and trying to, and like we've recorded like 1 million test episodes of that kind of shit, and like. And it's something that I enjoy doing and I'm happy to do, like whether it's like picked up or not. But obviously the goal is to get like make shit bigger and like blow it up and pick it up.
Well, it's frustrating to do when we just don't have the time or ability unless it is picked up. If that was,
I understand that the frustration is definitely like the genesis of all of this. Yeah. That there's like a deep seated like issue, or it's like a deep seated like almost like. You're not given a fair chance, like kind of overshadowing something.
I wouldn't say not given a fair chance. I hate what happened yesterday when Dave goes back into things that have happened in the past and calls me lazy or did not work or did not do stuff or you had the chance and you didn't do it. No, man. Like I asked to do it and I got told no. Like I hate the fact that like Drive Time was canceled and he never listened to an episode of it and said like it wasn't good enough, even though like everyone like it goes deep. And
you and Dave have some deep-seated beef, and that's I mean obviously like I understand your frustration from your view. It's like I can just basically like get whatever I want because like me and Dave have a different relationship and you and Dave have more of like a contentious relationship. I just wanted to clear the air and let you know that there's like no hard feelings. You're welcome on the show whenever you want.
Yeah, we'd be happy to have you
as much knowledge as we can because we're doing terrible, or I'm doing terrible in one of my leagues. But I just didn't want you to think that there was any hard feelings or like any like disrespect. Like now that you know, like I wasn't like trying to slight you in any way.
I was just forgotten about, which is worse when you think about it. But
yeah,
not really forgotten about it. It was just like it was just like me and Rowan started a podcast. We need a commissioner. Let's get an intern to be a commissioner. And that's the podcast. We'll do the Twitch. Like that in my head, I was like, we'll do the Twitch stream with Smitty. Like we do a fantasy show on Twitch. It'll be good. Like Twitch is his thing. Fantasy. He's done fantasy stuff before. Like boom. It wasn't a forgotten about. It just wasn't really like. There was never a point where I was like, going down a list like who should we do with this podcast. It was just like okay, we have 2 hosts, like co-hosts, like we're good.
But that's my point. Like I did it for 3 years, and the content that erupted with Rapaport was solely around fantasy football. The fact, now you're a lot smarter than me when it comes to this medium. In my mind, it's like, why wouldn't we want Smitty to be a part of this and be like, oh, fuck you, Rapaport. Like, we're back on top. Let's go.
Right.
Like,
I mean, that is fair. Like, that's why, I mean, there was the entire 2018, like, nothing happened. Like, someone somewhere should have been like, yo, like, fuck Rapaport. Like, Smitty, get back on a podcast and do it. I was just like, is anyone doing this? No. All right, let's do it, Rowan. Like it wasn't. So I just wanted to put that out there. Hopefully this clears things up for you. I don't know.
And that said, I mean, if you want to contribute, like I feel like, or I don't know, are you still mad about it?
I'm not necessarily mad about it. I will never be able to be a part of it now to the extent that I want to without it feeling like a kind of pity grab.
Well, that's not true. Let's see what you. I mean, I don't know what exactly you're trying to get out of it. You're in the league. I think we should just get into the regular like inside Barstool that we would do with anyone that we do week by week with just people from the league. Talk about the league. Unless you have any closing remarks on this whole saga, fantasy football, territorial saga.
I mean, not really. We'll just keep going around in circles, but it's okay.
Where does it end?
It never ends.
Yeah.
It never ends.
Dude, but think about it as a Philly guy, just being like, dude, I'm shit on for all this shit. I'm just like put down. I'm fucking, marginalized, not given a fair shake. Like that's the story of the city, and it ends with the championship every single time.
No, it ended with the championship one time in the past 12 years, which is fine, and then, 2 times in the past 36 years, but
every story, it's like you win the league against Rapaport, like you win the rough and rowdy fight, like you win the Super Bowl against Dave, like you go head to head and sit next to him, like
get your dicks filmed in the shower.
Exactly. And if I could put
that wind up winning,
if I could put that stuff as if I could cite all that stuff as being beneficial for me for contract time, then it would be a win. But we're getting married, and weddings ain't cheap.
Yeah, that is the.
Yeah.
That's why you. I mean, you're probably looking like you're going to win this league. You have to be at the top of the standings, if not in flat out first place.
We're up there. My team wasn't strong enough to win the league. I made a trade today in which I think improved it greatly, but you're still going to need some luck.
Let's talk about this trade, because I've heard some rumblings that Big Tennessee is basically just making up new rules on the fly. How did it go about from your perspective? Like, you wanted to make a trade with
Coley and I wanted to make a trade. It ended up being me trading away Devontae Adams and Devonta Freeman. I might have the Devontas mixed up.
2 Devontas, though.
Yeah.
You got rid of all the Devontas on your team.
I got rid of all the Devontas for Ronald Jones II, Allen Robinson II, and Todd Gurley II. The problem was...
So Devontas for juniors.
Yes, seconds.
Seconds.
The problem was Yahoo said that the trade would go through on Friday. However, Devontae Adams plays tomorrow night, Thursday, which we don't know how that would affect the trade and the numbers. We want it done as soon as possible because, like, God forbid if one of them gets injured, then
right.
Going to be a lot of conversation and controversy to the trade. And also, we wouldn't think that Yahoo would take away one player and their points and put it on another team or leave roster spots empty. We just wanted it settled by today. And at that point, Mush says, I'm vetoing it for no other reason than Mush trying to cause.
He says that he vetoes in his other league. He vetoes every trade.
Yeah,
so even if it's kicker for kicker, he's vetoing that trade. He
Yeah.
just doesn't like, as a gambler, he doesn't like to see anyone else getting any type of edge.
Mm-hmm. He's an agent of chaos when it comes to that. And all the other sheep around were just automatically going with him. Oh, yeah, I'm going to veto it too, just to say veto. In reality, it's a fairly even trade. If anything, he's getting the better part of it until things might shake out.
Devontae Adams is the marquee player of the trade.
Yeah, I would say Gurley too, but
Gurley, yeah. I mean, I feel like a lot of people are more sour on Todd Gurley than obviously you are. It seems like you're selling high on Adams and maybe buying low on Gurley.
Oh, I'm not selling high on Adams. I think Adams is top 5 receiver in the league. I didn't want to get rid of Adams, but the way this league is structured, you only have to play 2 wide receivers at a time. I predicate my fantasy teams on having every down backs as much as possible. So if I can get 3 every down backs going into the playoffs, then I'm going to have it made in the shade. And right now, or on my roster, I have Devonta Freeman, who stinks, absolute bum. I have Austin Eckler, who's great, but Melvin Gordon's coming back. You don't know what's going on. I have Derrick Henry, who's great, but injury concerns always amount around him. So basically, after next week, I could possibly have Derrick Henry as my only back. Now I have Todd Gurley, who, granted, he's not slinging as he was the past couple of years, but he's still an every down back.
He might sling.
There's like a Todd Gurley roulette when they get close, though. They do that whole 60-40 thing with that other guy. It's tough.
Austin Eckler, even when Melvin Gordon comes back, he's still a very viable option in PPR leagues as a flex.
200 receiving yards on the year. It's
Exactly.
pretty good.
I have Latavius Murray on the bench as a handcuff at this point because he's not getting Mark Ingram yards what he did last year. Jordan Howard could develop into a number 1 back. And I really like Ronald Jones II because he's a second-round draft pick that is packing up, basically splitting carries with Peyton Barber right now, who also stinks. So there's a chance, at least in my mind, that Ronald Jones might, towards the end of the year, maybe, just maybe, pull a Derrick Henry like we did last year and start exploding.
And did you cave into this trade? Like, you just let it happen, or was there any
No,
It
so
seems like you didn't know what was going on, and
allow
then
me
you
to
just kind of
explain. No,
just let it go.
No, incorrect. So what happened was, as Smitty explained, we had the concern with the Thursday night game and the trade not going through. Also, I was unaware that the league was structured to vote on trades. Now,
Just
when
tough as a commissioner.
Yeah,
Very
that's
tough.
Almost like it's
that was
your job.
I will own that I did not look at the default setting for that, and that was my fault. I go over to talk to them about the trade, and I hear Marty talking about how, we're just going to veto it. And that made no sense to me. Then my job is to look at the trade, make sure everything's good to go, and then if the 2 governors agree on it, then that's fine. There's no reason that Marty and whoever else needs to be voting on it.
You don't think the league should have a say?
No,
Why would that be the default setting?
I don't know. I think Yahoo's got some weird going on. But
So you're the only person that gets to have any kind of say on any trades.
Yeah, what determines what's fair and what's unfair?
well, if the two people who are making the trade agree on it, why should any other governor
What if they're trying to
says
throw the
matter?
league? What if I'm like, Rowan, I'm going to lose this shit, take all my good players, and then you win
Then
the
that's
league?
where I come in, look at the trade, and if it is someone trying to throw the league, I will veto it, not leave it up to the rest of the
They're
league.
acting like he's an idiot, in which Foghorn Leghorn could put out some times that he does not.
disagree.
He
Wait,
does
how
not
are you
be up
guys
to
even
par.
friends after this fucking after what happened during the Falcons
forgot
Eagles
about-
game?
I actually
This is the first time
completely
they've sat
forgot
next to
about
each
that.
other since then.
And
I
Smitty
thought
did
that
say
they were
some
about
things
to,
about me on radio, but I've forgiven him.
You know,
I completely forgot.
you're
I don't-
making,
I
you're
don't
trying to
e-
make a mark. You went a little spastic after every single play during
I
the game,
don't.
which is
we,
fine.
we discussed this on the show last week. That was not like playing it up, anything like that. That is, I don't enjoy watching games with other people because that's how I get. And I don't even disagree with some of the things you said.
No offense to you, I did not enjoy watching the
Okay,
game.
and
with
that's
you.
and that's totally fair. And that's, but I think,
but as a person, I like you.
but I think
just
we're fine.
watching
we're
a game
cool.
next to you.
it made me
was-
furious. I was watching.
it was
those-
I would not.
outrageous.
I would not want to watch a game with me if I was an opposing fan either. I agree.
Fair enough.
Why don't you just change how you act?
I can't control.
Yes,
it.
you can control
During
it.
sports, I can't.
You're a person. You're a human being.
You don't want to control. You wear your heart in your sleeve. That's, I
I
got no
saw
problem with
when I
that.
watched that back on video. I saw half that I did not remember doing half the stuff.
The dirty bird.
I did remember that. I mean, that's iconic.
Calling yourself iconic is
No,
the least
the
iconic thing you
dance.
could do.
The dance.
Calling
is
Jamal
iconic.
Anderson iconic. I can.
Correct.
Tim Dwight. That's iconic.
All right. Well, I mean, I think so. You're happy with this trade going forward. You rivalry week right now. Your projection's close. I think you're like two or 3 points with.
Yeah, that
with
trade
Jeff
hurts
Lowe.
me this week because Devontae Adams is probably going to throw up 4 touchdowns and 600 yards against the Eagles.
What is on the line with you guys again?
I believe as of now, the person or party that loses needs to sit quietly during Nate's hour live stream on Twitch Monday mornings.
Speaking
Now-
of rivalry week,
Now you weren't there yesterday, but a laxative was mentioned. I don't know if that's part of it officially or not.
no, that was just guys being dudes throwing
Okay.
around. Funny.
So
was-
so
that
it's
was-
it
just
would be funny, but
it's just sitting behind Nate while he does his stream with no phone, no nothing.
I mean, a laxative. That's kind of.
I thought that was a bit
That's
much.
kind. It's not a bit much if there was absolutely full access to everything, but you're just withering away in pain by yourself.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
no, I think someone said that like you guys should have to also eat a laxative, but that was never.
Laxatives are. I
It was
mean,
never put on the contract.
it's
That was
funny.
Never, that was
That
just,
is
it was
funny.
thrown out at the table.
It's funny, but you know what I mean. Yeah, it's not. It didn't make it into the bet.
All right, so I mean, other. So we do this with every special guest we have. You have played fantasy football for how many years, Smitty?
Phew. We're talking about today. My brothers and I had a Yahoo League going since 1998
Whew.
Jesus Christ, we have some
It was,
fantasy OGs.
you had
in
that
this office.
on a computer though.
on a computer.
Wow.
Way back when. Dante Culpepper getting lit up in the first round.
Was he?
But he
Damn.
probably lit it up for your team that whole year.
Yeah, Randy
before-
Moss, Chris Carter.
Oh, yeah. Believe
Yeah,
it. I think
Robert
Cunningham
Smith.
was a pick in 98.
Yeah.
Damn, actually, he
Yeah,
probably
it
was. He
goes
was
way
starting
back.
in '98 because Culpepper was drafted when '99. He was.
No, I
in-
think 98 was the year
Around
they
there, yeah.
Yeah, the year they should have won.
98 was with Cunningham, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was with Dante Cunningham. I think 01 was with.
Culpepper.
Regardless, that's. Do you remember what the team was called?
I've always been Nest of Death. An ode to an old Eagles defense. Occasionally, like in this league, I just do it for the love of the game, not for the flair, and just leave it as a default name. So my name in this league is Adam's team.
Is that grit? So that's grittier, probably, to be like, I don't care what you call it, whatever you want to call it.
Pretty much. I just combination between apathy and
You're not in this league for fun. You're in this league for domination.
sure, why not? Occasionally, in my friends' league, they try to do like themed years. I think last year was like a history themed, so I did. So you got to combine a history theme with an NFL theme. So I did Bay of Andy Reid's, which is a reference to Bay of Pigs and Andy Reid's weight.
Yes, naturally.
I felt that was okay.
That's fantastic.
But usually, I'm Nest of Death or default.
How many leagues in a year are you usually in?
Fantasy, I'm in 4 leagues this year, as well as daily fantasy heavy.
And you're not joking around when you play daily fantasy.
No. Most of my attention is focused on daily fantasy and not season long.
I'm interested.
Other than the draft.
I'm interested to hear your daily fantasy stuff because I've gotten way into it more this year. Do you like strategy wise? I'm getting like kind of mixed signals week in and week out where I'm not, because last week I'm not sure whether to submit a lot of lineups and just like scatter it around the whole Sunday, or just to really like sink into one or two lineups you love and just throw them into as many contests as you can.
Well, it depends on what you want to do. Are you playing cash or are you playing
FanDuel? I'm playing on FanDuel.
No, I know, but are you playing to cash, like to double up, like 50-50s, heads up, so you want to double your money and be profitable? Or are you playing tournaments where you want like long shots, like $9 to win $1 million?
I'm playing so far more of those. I've played a couple like $150, $200 like smaller contests, but I've for the most part been doing.
So you're playing tournaments,
yeah.
MTTs for the most part. For cash lineups, you want to go with who you think is going to get the most action. Lamar Jackson, obviously, the most action.
No, but I'm saying, do you do one lineup and then just put that?
For cash, I do one lineup. For tournaments, it's all over the place. Absolutely all over the place. Because you
do cash against other people, you're saying? That's what.
Usually what I do, like my bankroll this year was $1,000 going into the year, and I have zero bankroll management, so I spent all $1,000 the first week. Half of which I put in on cash, 50-50s, double ups, and heads up. And I use one established lineup. And if I win that, then I end up winning my money back. And I put the other half of the money in multi tournaments where you go for the gold. And usually if you min cash, like I end up winning money, but the hope is that one of these lineups will fucking come through. It never does. But 3 years ago, it did one time. But
one time, and that's all you need, that fucking big-ass contest win?
one time, $20K, and then you're set for the year.
That's huge.
Holy shit,
yeah.
I'm fucking
Last year I was
hard.
really close. Week 1 I was very close.
It's almost like it's torture to watch your lineup throughout the entire game, because there will be times when you'll find yourself. I've been finding myself like, oh, I'm like fucking number 28 out of 60,000 people, but it's like that shit. Like you wind up fading back into the rest of the crowd, until like the very, very end of the game. It's almost pointless to try and ride the wave of it and try and stay at the front of it.
Well, the worst part is if you really fade a player and they end up exploding early, then you're fucked. Like week 1, I faded the Patriots defense. Yep, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
The winner is going to have that Patriots defense because they have 33 points and the next highest defense was like 15. Like. But on the reverse side, if you really hammer a guy, like last week, I had McCaffrey, I had the Patriots again, and then I had like Aguilar, and I had someone else that I knew was going to do very well, and he did very well. Then you can ride it out because you know you're at least going to min cash, especially in 50-50 leagues. But then again, you have Ezekiel Elliott, like I started last week in every single one of my lineups, and Tony Pollard gets the majority of the fucking action, and I was fucked.
It's a deadly world out there, and it's a lot of fun to play. But there's obviously the ups and downs, and
it's all downs.
So
the Sharks win all the money in daily fantasy.
Damn, we just got to become sharks. That's our problem, is that we just fucking aren't sharks. Once we become sharks, then we'll be winning the majority of the money. That's obviously what it has to be.
Well, also the Sharks,
they're just numbers guys. That's the biggest. I just hate like the more I research, the more it's like you need to be a math nerd, and it's like I'm just not. That's just not. It's not in my bag of tricks.
The numbers, yes, help, but also the volume helps. They play so much and so many lineups
that I can do.
It's very, very tough to break through.
So it's just a volume thing. What's so many?
Oh, because they're going to be at the top of like multiple contests and shit.
Exactly. I mean, we're talking hundreds.
Hundreds of lineups?
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, I guess that's what we have to do. Just flood the field, and hopefully we'll wind up at the top. How much do you think how much of an investment do you think that should be to really flood the field and become a shark?
It's a considerable amount.
Like,
It's
what's
a
Bales
fucking
pumping
considerable
into the system on a fucking Sunday?
I feel like Bales is like 21, like he's like blackballed from like casinos and shit. Like they see a lineup, they're like, this is Bales.
No,
Well, it's funny because all those guys, they are one step ahead of whatever is out there. Like, they all grew up playing online poker, and that's how they made their money. And then people caught up to online poker, the government shut it down, and then they moved on to fantasy, and they won more money. And now they're on from fantasy, they're on to cryptocurrency, and now they're on from cryptocurrency to some other fucking cryptocurrency. Like, they are just one step ahead of the fray.
Those sons of bitches. I hate it. I hate being on the outside while they're on the inside. But we're gonna become sharks, or we'll die by the sharks.
No, we're not smart enough. Maybe you are, but like, I'm not smart enough.
What math are they doing?
Dude, they create algorithms for everything.
But how do you create
Bales-
a
Dude,
Hanging out with
a
these guys,
website.
they are fascinating to hang out with because the conversations they have are so analytical about every little thing, and they are so far above my feeble mind that I'm just feel like I'm lucky to hang out with them. Like, you
steal
know,
their
next
picks, bro? At
level
least get
shit
some
is
picks
going on.
off of them. Jesus Christ!
You don't
At
think
least
I try?
Let him set a lineup for you. Jesus Christ, bro.
Well, that was part of the thing when Rapaport and I were going heads up. Like, I've obviously.
Oh, Bales was setting all your lineups.
No,
He wasn't
they were
setting-
saying that.
They were saying that
Salacious rumors.
Bales would send me potential lineups, and I would change them around to as I see fit.
Plagiarism 101.
Pretty much.
Just rewrite the Wikipedia.
Yep.
It's genius.
Yes, but only in those head-to-head contests.
Which is
Genius.
fair. It's all fair in love and war. It's all fair in fantasy. I
But
mean,
there's times that, especially Bales, is way off. Like, he'll go on a fucking player and ride them for every single week and think they're going to explode. I mean, there's a running joke in our old podcast that Justin Hunter was the best receiver in the league because every single fucking week, Bales said Justin Hunter is going to go off. He's too talented not to go off. Justin Hunter stinks. And then he got arrested.
Dude, but if you're saying someone's
Can't be
talented,
right all the time.
that doesn't sound like math. That sounds like he's just doing an eye test and that he's falling in love with the player. That doesn't sound like he's a big mathematician.
Trust me, there was some sort of John Nash algorithm that said Justin
Yeah,
Hunter
he was just
due to
writing on
explode.
chalkboards.
Yeah.
Fuck. Well, Smitty, we appreciate you coming in. We appreciate your expertise. It's a journey that we're all going to be on together for the entire season. So I'm sure we haven't at least heard the last of you, and we're very excited to see how this bet winds up. Whether you have to shit yourself while you listen to Nate's podcast or whatever the fuck bet that you guys made for rivalry week.
Don't need a laxative for that.
Exactly, brother. We just shit ourselves on command over here at the factory. But Smitty, thanks for riding with us. Hank, anything else?
no, that's it. I mean, this is the end of the show. We'll be on Twitch on Tuesday, Barstool Game Time. Follow us, Fantasy Football Factory, FFF Pod on Twitter and Instagram. Smitty, I'll give you the last words.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right.